This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony. Johannes Brahms wrote his first works for orchestra when he was in his early 20s. But unlike so many great composers before him, they weren't symphonies. They were two orchestral serenades, one of which doesn't use violins, and a piano concerto. Robert Schumann had proclaimed Brahms the savior of music when he was barely 20, and Brahms knew that in order to live up to those high expectations, and in order to be seen as the great composer he knew he was, he would eventually have to write a symphony. But Brahms was also notoriously self-critical. He would not write a symphony until he knew he was ready. Over the next 15 years or so, he tried to find his orchestral voice by writing several works for chorus and orchestra, including his German Requiem, and his variations on a theme by Haydn. He deflected the expectations of others by telling them that he was intimidated by the ghost of Beethoven, whose symphonies were held as the gold standard. "You have no idea what it's like to hear the footsteps of a giant behind you," he said. Brahms finally finished his first symphony when he was 43, and it was a huge relief and a big success. He was so elated by this hard-fought spiritual victory that he immediately started on a second one at a lakeside resort in Austria, where he said that melodies were so abundant that one had to be careful not to step on them. Brahms was fond of practical jokes, and whenever anyone asked him what his new symphony would be like, he would say that it was so sad that the orchestra would have to play with mourning bands on their arms, and the manuscript would have to have a black border. If Brahms' first symphony was an epic, his second is an idyll, with plenty of humor, but also a tinge of melancholy, as if to say that every silver lining must have a little cloud somewhere. Those first three notes in the low strings are the basic building blocks of the whole first movement. It goes in many directions. With one tune leading to another, but somehow everything remains tied to home base, even when the pattern comes back in later movements. This symphony is almost always described by writers as sunny, and that's the way conductors generally approach it. But there are clouds in the sky too. Even the theme that resembles Brahms' famous lullaby turns poignant. In Brahms' day, the music world was divided into two camps: the Wagnerians, who embraced music, drama, and tone poems as the music of the future, and the Brahmsians, who felt that music's future lay in embracing the abstract ideals of the past. Brahms' symphonies are inspired updates of the classical structures perfected by Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. So when it's time for the development section of this movement, that little three-note theme returns to launch it. The coda is powerfully nostalgic at first. But then this jaunty little tune comes in, sounding almost tacked on as an afterthought. That's the hallmark of this symphony, the alternation of light and dark. In E.M. Forster's Howard's End, the character Helen says that Beethoven can be trusted because even when his music is at its most resplendent, the goblins return. Brahms' second may not include goblins, but his characters know that love has an underside that can reveal itself quickly and unexpectedly. Two moods play off each other in the second movement as well. A stern opening that changes almost immediately into a long, lush, majestic melody. Those two moods alternate throughout this movement, one pensive and searching, the other full of optimism. The music may seem to wander as it grows more meditative. And then nostalgic again. With frequent glimpses of the darkness underneath. This is as serious as the music in this symphony will get. But all the turbulence comes to a peaceful ending. The third movement is marked allegretto grazioso, a little fast and graceful. It's Brahms at his most lighthearted. And it's a welcome break after the seriousness of the second movement, but at the same time it reinforces the adagio's two voices, the pensive and the joyful. The finale begins in a hush. But then suddenly erupts in a shout. Another quick cut from one character to its opposite. Remember this melody. It's another reminder that every silver lining has a nearby cloud. It'll return towards the end in a heroic transformation. One more way in which Brahms tries to give us the complete picture. Brahms' Second Symphony was a huge hit at its first performance. The audience demanded that the finale be repeated as an encore. Even the notoriously caustic critic Edvard Hanslick was charmed. Brahms had written him that the symphony was so cheerful and delightful that you will think I wrote it especially for you. It took less than a year for it to make it across the Atlantic for its American premiere, and it has been an audience favorite ever since, possibly because, while it takes us away from the world around us, it also reminds us of it. This is Rick Malone for the San Francisco Symphony.